During COVID, something strange happened. All of a sudden, policymakers remembered a basic economic truth. And they remembered it at the worst possible moment for public safety. This truth helps explain a policy called Eat Out to Help Out, and the deep irony of why we're now back to austerity again. COVID didn't cause a normal economic downturn. People weren't broke. We weren't unwilling to work. We were told to stay at home. As a result, spending collapsed, especially in businesses like restaurants, cafes and pubs. From an economic perspective, this set off alarm bells. Because when everyone stops spending at once, something called the paradox of thrift kicks in. The paradox of thrift is a simple idea. Saving is a sensible option for one person. If I tighten my belt, so to speak, my savings will of course increase. But what would happen if everyone else had the same idea? Businesses lose income. Eventually, workers lose jobs. Total income in the economy falls. And ironically, society doesn't end up saving more at all. In a downturn, collective thrift makes everyone poorer. Economists know this, or at least they should know this. So enter Eat Out to Help Out, a programme to increase economic demand on the high street during the COVID pandemic and keep businesses alive. The UK government agreed to pay half the cost of meals at restaurants and cafes, up to £10. Economically, this is what would be called a targeted stimulus, aimed at the hospitality sector, designed to get us spending now. From a narrow economic viewpoint, it worked. Cafes and restaurants did fill up, the money flowed, and jobs were temporarily protected. But here's the problem. The paradox of thrift assumes the economy is the constraint. But during COVID, it wasn't. The constraint was a virus. Empty restaurants weren't just an economic failure. They were empty because filling them was seen to be dangerous. So economists correctly identified a demand problem and responded by encouraging the one thing public health needed to avoid: people gathering indoors. In other words, a macroeconomic solution was applied at a moment when restraint was medically necessary. Good economics, bad timing. Here's where the irony really bites. For years before COVID, we were told a different story. We were told a responsible government must tighten its belt and live within its means. This is austerity ideology, and it completely ignores the paradox of thrift. Because if people aren't spending, and the government cuts spending too, demand collapses, and the economy stagnates, risking recession. That's exactly what austerity does. It literally takes money out of the economy. So notice the contradiction here. On one hand, policymakers say cuts will grow the economy, but on the other, on the precipice of an economic disaster, they finally admit the truth. But once the immediate crisis passed, we return to the old language. Budgets need tightening. Spending is risky. Austerity is fiscally responsible again. As if the paradox of thrift had vanished overnight. It didn't. What returned wasn't economic reality. It was ideology. Eat Out to Help Out revealed something important. It showed us that governments know spending supports income. Economists understand collective saving can be counterproductive, and the economy is not like a household. But the real tragedy here is that Eat Out to Help Out was entirely unnecessary. It was well within the government's capabilities to unconditionally support these businesses through the pandemic. But for policymakers, still ideologically bound by the economic fallacy that a government which issues its own currency still needs to somehow live within its means, well, this was seen a step too far. The result? A second wave of infections. And the irony? Once the danger had passed, we forgot the economic lesson entirely.